Jack Harrigan had been elbow-deep in malfunctioning machinery for approximately 6 hours, which was about average for a Tuesday. The gravity stabilizer on the Celestial Dawn had developed what he diagnosed as catastrophic attitude problems, which was engineer speak for "this system is held together by prayer and spite, and the prayer just failed." He was currently wedged into an access panel that clearly wasn't designed for human proportions, his diagnostic scanner beeping unhelpfully when his supervisor's voice crackled through his comm unit. "Harrigan, need you planetside. Emergency repair at the Grand Palace on Thessara Prime." Jack extracted himself from the panel with the grace of someone who'd spent years contorting into spaces engineers shouldn't fit. "I'm kind of in the middle of preventing this ship from experiencing unplanned gravity in random directions. They're paying triple rate and specifically requested human engineers. Something about our innovative problem-solving approaches. That's corporate speak for willing to violate safety protocols creatively." Jack wiped grease off his hands onto his already stained coveralls. "What's broken?" "Primary generator, cascading failures. Thessaran tech teams can't figure it out." "Of course they can't. Their systems are beautiful and elegant and completely impossible to troubleshoot." Jack grabbed his tool kit, which had been with him through 11 star systems and looked like it had fought a war. "Fine, but I'm billing for the full day, including the gravity stabilizer I'm leaving half fixed." "Noted. Shuttle leaves in 20. The Grand Palace of Thessara Prime was the kind of structure that made human architecture look like we'd been building with mud and optimism. Crystalline spires rose into the planet's purple sky. Gardens floated on anti-gravity platforms, and the whole thing seemed to have been grown rather than constructed. Jack, who appreciated good engineering even when it was showing off, spent the shuttle ride reading diagnostic reports and trying not to be impressed. The Thessaran attendant who met him at the landing pad was polite, formal, and gave Jack a list of instructions about restricted areas, proper etiquette, and the importance of not touching certain decorative elements that were actually load-bearing structural components. Jack nodded along while studying his scanner, which was already picking up power fluctuations that suggested the generator problems were worse than reported. "Do you understand the restricted areas?" the attendant asked, her long ears tilting forward in what Jack had learned meant focused attention. "Absolutely. Completely understood." Jack's scanner beeped, showing a critical junction point that was definitely in a section she just told him not to enter. "Which way to the generator core?" She directed him through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel insignificant, all soaring ceilings and architectural elements that defied physics. Jack followed his scanner more than her directions, his engineer brain automatically mapping power flow and identifying failure points. The generator itself was a work of art, Thessaran technology at its finest, running on principles that human science was still trying to fully understand. It was also failing spectacularly, with error codes cascading across holographic displays in patterns that suggested multiple simultaneous problems. Jack got to work with the focused intensity that made him good at his job. He bypassed safeties, rerouted power flow, and generally performed what his supervisor called engineering magic, and what safety inspectors called violations we'll pretend we didn't see. 3 hours in, he found the core problem. A feedback loop in the quantum resonance chamber that was creating harmonic interference. The fix required accessing a junction point his scanner showed was through a doorway marked with Thessaran, symbols his translator rendered as private, authorized personnel only. Jack, operating on engineer logic that fixing the problem trumps protocol, followed his readings through the restricted doorway. The corridor beyond was different, less grand, more intimate, with lighting that seemed designed for comfort rather than impression. His scanner led him to an ornate door that was definitely not supposed to be opened by maintenance personnel. He opened it anyway, because the critical junction was on the other side, and generator failures didn't respect privacy designations. The room beyond was a meditation chamber, all flowing curves and soft light, with a view of the floating gardens through floor-to-ceiling windows. And standing in the center, looking at him with an expression of complete surprise, was a Thessaran woman whose presence somehow filled the entire space. She was tall, elegant in the way her species naturally was, with long ears that curved in perfect mathematical precision. Her features carried that otherworldly beauty that made Thessaran women subjects of admiration across human space, and her eyes, violet in a shade that didn't exist in Earth's color spectrum, were currently locked on Jack with an intensity that suggested he'd made a significant error. Jack's social skills, which were functional but not refined, kicked in approximately 3 seconds too late. "Sorry," he said, holding up his scanner like it explained everything. "Generator failure, critical junction. I need to access the panel behind you." The woman didn't move. She spoke in Terran standard with an accent that made every word sound important. "Do you know where you are? A really nice meditation room that I'm definitely not supposed to be in." Jack ventured. "Look, I apologize for the intrusion, but if I don't fix this junction in the next 20 minutes, your palace is going to experience cascading power failures that will make the diplomatic summit happening tomorrow very awkward. Do you know who I am?" Jack looked at her properly. The formal robes that probably cost more than his annual salary, the bearing that suggested someone accustomed to authority, the way she occupied space like she owned it. His brain suggested she was probably someone important, a high-ranking diplomat maybe, or wealthy patron. His mouth, however, engaged before consulting his brain. "I know I'm probably supposed to recognize you, but honestly, all I know is you're the most stunning alien woman I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of alien women in my line of work." The silence that followed could have been measured in geological epochs. Through the doorway behind him, Jack heard movement, guards probably, who had just heard him say something that was either incredibly inappropriate or incredibly stupid. Possibly both. The woman's ears had gone completely rigid, which Jack's limited experience with Thessaran body language suggested was significant but didn't specify how. Her violet eyes were still locked on him, and her expression had shifted to something between shock and an emotion he couldn't identify. "What," she said slowly, carefully, "did you just say?" Jack, whose survival instincts were finally catching up with his mouth, realized he'd made some kind of error. But backing down now would make it worse, and he'd learned early in his engineering career that when you made a mistake, you committed to it and fixed it or died trying. "Stunning," he repeated, his voice steadier than his confidence. "Beautiful, gorgeous actually. Is that inappropriate? Because if it is, I apologize, but it's also objectively true based on every aesthetic standard I'm aware of." Someone behind him, definitely a guard, made a sound like they were being strangled. The woman continued staring at him, and then something impossible happened. She laughed. It was a genuine sound, surprised and warm, and it completely transformed her presence from intimidating authority figure to actual person. Her ears relaxed from their rigid position, tilting forward in what Jack hoped was amusement rather than preparation for his execution. She turned toward the doorway where guards were frozen in various states of shock. "Leave us." "Your Majesty," one guard started. Now, they left with the kind of reluctant obedience that suggested this was unusual and possibly concerning. Jack watched them go, his brain finally processing the "Your Majesty" part and arriving at several alarming conclusions simultaneously. The woman, the queen, his brain supplied helpfully while the rest of him began composing apology letters, turned back to him with an expression that might have been amusement. "Do you know what you just did?" Called the Queen of Thessara, stunning to her face. Jack hazarded. "In my defense, my cultural briefing was very short and mostly focused on not touching the floating gardens." "You called the Queen of Thessara, sovereign ruler of the Thessaran Confederacy, commander of the 4th largest fleet in known space, diplomatic head of a civilization spanning 12 star systems. Stunning." She moved closer, and Jack noticed she was actually taller than him, which was impressive given human height averages. To my face, in my private meditation chamber, while covered in generator grease. That does sound bad when you list it out like that. It is unprecedented. She was studying him now with the kind of focused attention that felt like being analyzed at the molecular level. I am Queen Serafina Velsara of House Meridian, first of the Council, keeper of the Stellar Accord. I have ruled for 23 years. In that time, no one, not ambassadors, not military commanders, not even my own family, has spoken to me with such complete lack of calculation. I'm really not good at calculation, Jack admitted. I'm an engineer. We're more about solving problems than political nuance. Why did you say it? Her voice was softer now, curious rather than authoritative. Why call me stunning when you had no idea who I was? Jack considered lying, decided that ship had sailed, and went with honesty. Because it's true, and I'm not good at not saying true things. It's got me in trouble before, but usually with machinery, not royalty. Queen Sira. His brain insisted on the formal title, but she'd shortened it herself, tilted her head slightly, her ears tracking his movement as he shifted his weight. You have no agenda, no political motivation. You simply said what you thought. That's generally how I operate, yeah. Is that a problem? It is revolutionary. She smiled, and Jack realized it transformed her entire face from regal authority to something more human, or as human as an alien queen could be. Every word spoken to me is calculated. Every interaction designed to achieve some political end or avoid giving offense. And you walked into my private chamber, interrupted my meditation, and called me beautiful without any apparent understanding of why that matters. I'm starting to get the sense it matters a lot. It matters because no one has seen me as a person in years. They see a queen, a symbol, a political entity to be maneuvered around. Her voice carried something that might have been loneliness. And you saw a woman and spoke honestly. Jack's comm unit chose that moment to crackle with his supervisor's voice. Harrigan, status report. Busy, Jack said without taking his eyes off Sira. Minor complication. The palace guard just reported you're in a restricted area with. Jack disconnected the comm, which would definitely get him written up later, but seemed more immediately relevant to not dying. I should probably fix your generator before the cascading failures become catastrophic. You're concerned about my generator after calling me stunning and discovering I'm a queen. I'm concerned about my generator, technically, since I'm the one who'll get blamed if it fails. Jack held up his scanner. The junction I need to access is right behind you. This is going to be awkward. Sira's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement or might have been testing his nerve. She stepped aside with fluid grace. By all means, Engineer Harrigan, fix my generator. Jack moved past her, acutely aware of the proximity, and the fact that he was covered in grease while she probably smelled like whatever expensive things queens smelled like. The junction panel opened with a soft hiss, revealing exactly the problem his scanner had predicted. He worked in focused silence, his hands moving with practiced precision, while Queen Sira watched from a position that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. You're very good at that, she observed. It's what I do. Systems make sense. They follow rules. When they break, there's a reason and you fix the reason. He bypassed a burnt-out relay, rerouting power through secondary channels. Much simpler than people. People follow rules too, just more complicated ones. Yeah, and I'm terrible at those. Jack closed the panel, checking his scanner's readings. There. Your generator should stabilize in about 5 minutes, and the cascading failures will stop. You're welcome to continue your meditation without worrying about sudden darkness. I wasn't worried. Sira was still watching him with that intense focus. Tell me, Engineer Harrigan, do you make a habit of wandering into restricted areas and complimenting women you don't recognize? First time, actually. Usually I just fix things and leave before anyone important notices me. Unfortunately for you, I noticed. Her smile was sharper now, carrying implications Jack's social skills couldn't quite parse. And I find myself curious about the human who sees beauty where others see power. They're not mutually exclusive, Jack pointed out, gathering his tools. You can be powerful and beautiful. Those aren't competing qualities. No, but they are rarely acknowledged simultaneously. She moved toward the door, then paused. You will remain on Thessara as a technical consultant. I'm certain we'll require your engineering expertise for other systems. Jack's brain caught up with the subtext approximately 10 seconds after his mouth opened. That sounds like a transparent excuse to keep me around. It is completely transparent. I'm a queen. I don't need subtle excuses. Her ears tilted forward, and what he was learning meant amusement. I'm simply curious whether your honesty extends beyond first impressions, or whether you'll learn to calculate your words like everyone else. I'm not great at learning that kind of lesson. Good. Sierra opened the door, where her guards immediately snapped to attention with expressions that suggested they'd been having intense conversations about protocol violations. Have him assigned quarters in the diplomatic wing. He'll be staying indefinitely. She left with the kind of exit that suggested she was accustomed to her orders being followed without question, and Jack stood alone in her meditation chamber with his tool kit and the dawning realization that he'd accidentally befriended alien royalty by calling her stunning. His supervisor was going to have so many questions. His scanner beeped, confirming the generator was stabilizing, and Jack reflected that he'd come to Thessara Prime to fix a power failure, and somehow ended up in a situation that was going to require much more complex problem-solving than anything in his engineering manual. Outside, the floating gardens drifted past the windows, beautiful and impossible. Inside, Jack Harrigan began to suspect his life had just gotten significantly more complicated than cascading generator failures. But at least the Queen thought he was honest. That had to count for something. The quarters they assigned Jack were approximately 17 times nicer than his cabin on the Celestial Dawn, which meant they had things like windows and furniture that wasn't bolted to the floor, and a bathroom that didn't require engineering knowledge to operate. He'd been escorted by 2 guards who maintained professional silence while radiating disapproval strong enough to detect from orbit. His tool kit had been confiscated for security review. His comm unit was temporarily unavailable, and he'd been informed that Her Majesty would appreciate your attendance at evening refreshments in the garden terrace at sunset. Jack, whose experience with royal protocol began and ended about 4 hours ago, spent the intervening time trying to process the fact that he'd called an alien queen stunning, fixed her generator, and was now apparently having drinks with her. His supervisor had managed to get one message through before communications were locked down. "What did you do?" in all capitals, which suggested the situation had escalated beyond normal diplomatic incidents. The garden terrace turned out to be a floating platform suspended over the palace grounds, covered in bioluminescent plants that pulsed with soft light as Thessara Prime's sun set in a display of colors Earth's sky had never managed. Jack arrived wearing the cleanest clothes he'd packed, which meant only slightly wrinkled, and found Queen Sierra already there, though she'd traded her formal robes for something simpler that still managed to look expensive. She was alone, which seemed significant. No guards visible, no attendants hovering, just her standing at the railing watching the sunset with an expression that suggested she was thinking about complicated things. "Engineer Harrigan," she said without turning around, "you came. Didn't seem like the kind of invitation you decline." Jack moved to the railing, keeping a respectful distance. "Though I should mention I'm not great at formal dinners if that's what this is." "It isn't. I wanted to talk without the court watching every interaction and assigning it political significance." She glanced at him, and in the softer light her features were less regal and more simply beautiful in ways that made his earlier comments seem inadequate. "Tell me about your work. You want to hear about generator maintenance." I want to hear why someone who fixes machines is comfortable saying things that terrify diplomats. Jack considered the question, leaning against the railing. Engineering is about understanding systems honestly. You can't fix something if you're not willing to see what's actually broken, regardless of whether that's convenient or polite. I guess that mindset extends to how I interact with people. Most people learn to filter their honesty around authority. I'm aware. I've been written up for it several times. He smiled slightly. Usually for telling captains their ship designs are stupid, not for calling queens stunning, but the principle is the same. Sierra laughed, that same genuine sound from earlier. You're remarkably consistent. I wasn't certain whether your earlier comment was bravery or simply not understanding the situation. Definitely not understanding. If I'd known you were the queen, I probably would have just awkwardly nodded and focused on the generator. Would you have thought it any less? Jack looked at her directly. No, you're still stunning. The queen part just adds complexity. Her ears tilted forward, and she moved closer to the railing beside him. I have ruled Thessara for 23 years. I ascended young, after my mother decided to retire to pursue botanical research, which is allowed under our system but rarely done. I have negotiated treaties, commanded fleets, and shaped policy that affects billions. And in all that time, every interaction has been mediated through ceremony and calculation. That sounds exhausting. It is profoundly lonely. Her voice was quiet. People bow. They use formal titles. They measure every word for political impact. I am treated as a symbol to be maneuvered around, never as a person to be simply seen. And then I walked in and called you beautiful without any idea who you were. Exactly. She turned to face him fully, and Jack noticed her eyes caught the bioluminescent light in ways that made them seem even more impossible. You saw a woman, not a queen, not a political entity, just a person you found attractive, and you said so with no agenda whatsoever. I feel like there should be a but coming. But nothing. I found it. She paused, choosing words carefully. Revolutionary, refreshing, genuine in ways I have not experienced in years, and I wanted to know whether that honesty was a momentary impulse or simply who you are. Jack processed this, his engineer brain trying to map the emotional complexity and coming up short. You're testing me. I'm curious about you. Sierra smiled, and it carried warmth that had nothing to do with royal authority. So tell me, Jack Harrigan, why do you fix generators on luxury liners instead of designing systems for the coalition? Because I'm good at fixing things that are broken, not building things from scratch. Design engineers create beautiful, elegant systems that work perfectly until they don't. I'm the person who figures out why they failed and how to keep them running with whatever parts are available. He shrugged. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. Honest, Sierra repeated. That word again, you value honesty highly. I value things that work. Honesty works. Lies and calculation require too much maintenance. You have to remember what you said to whom, adjust your story, manage perceptions. Truth is just true, much simpler. Except when truth gets you in trouble. Especially then, if truth gets you in trouble, that tells you something important about the situation. Jack looked at the gardens below, where lights were beginning to activate in the growing darkness. Like right now, I'm having drinks with an alien queen who invited me here because I accidentally said something honest, and I'm pretty sure your court is panicking about security protocols and political implications. They are absolutely panicking, Sierra confirmed with clear amusement. My head of security filed 3 separate objection reports about having an unknown human in private audience with no guards present. My diplomatic advisor composed a lengthy memo about the dangers of informal contact with coalition personnel, and my chief of staff suggested I might be experiencing some kind of stress-induced judgment impairment. Are you? No, I'm experiencing something I haven't felt in years, genuine curiosity about another person. She moved to a seating area where refreshments had been laid out, gesturing for him to join. Sit. Drink. Tell me more about these ships you keep running despite their stupid designs. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing from engineering to politics to the fundamental differences in how humans and Thessarans approached problem-solving. Sira was sharp, her intelligence obvious in how she dissected concepts and asked questions that revealed deep understanding. Jack found himself relaxing, forgetting the queen part and just enjoying talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in his perspectives. You approach everything like a system to be understood, Sira observed, refilling his drink with something that tasted like starlight and made him slightly dizzy. People, politics, technology, all just problems with solutions. Is that wrong? It's refreshingly pragmatic. My people tend toward philosophical complexity. We debate the deeper meanings, the cultural implications, the historical precedents. You just ask, what's broken and how do we fix it? Gets results faster. It does. She was watching him with that intense focus again, and Jack was becoming aware that this wasn't just casual conversation. She was evaluating him, though for what purpose he couldn't determine. What do you see when you look at me now that you know I'm a queen? Jack considered the question, looking at her in the soft light. I see someone who's powerful and probably makes decisions I can't comprehend the complexity of. Someone who's been alone in authority for so long that genuine interaction feels revolutionary. And yeah, still stunning. That part doesn't change based on job title. Sira's expression shifted to something vulnerable. You make it sound simple. Maybe it should be. You're a person who happens to have a really complicated job. Doesn't mean you stop being a person. My court would disagree. To them, I am the embodiment of Thessaran continuity and power. Personal feelings are secondary to political necessity. That sounds like a really depressing way to live. It is the reality of monarchy. But her voice carried something that might have been longing. Though I confess, talking with you makes me remember what it was like before the crown became all-consuming. The evening stretched on, the conversation deepening, and Jack found himself forgetting to be nervous. Jack stood alone on the garden terrace, looking at the impossible beauty of Thessara Prime at night, and contemplated the fact that he'd come here to fix a generator, and somehow ended up in whatever this was becoming. His scanner, returned by a disapproving attendant, beeped with a message from his supervisor. You're officially on extended assignment. Try not to cause an interstellar incident, more than you already have. Too late for that, Jack thought, watching the palace lights reflect off the floating gardens. Way too late. The next 3 days established a pattern that Jack's engineering mind recognized as systematically unusual. He was given official duties, reviewing palace power systems, optimizing environmental controls, upgrading communication arrays. That kept him legitimately busy, but also gave him access to areas most contractors never saw. And every evening, Queen Sira would find some reason to require his presence. Sometimes it was framed as technical consultation about infrastructure. Sometimes it was cultural exchange regarding human Thessaran engineering philosophy. Once it was officially listed as, "The Queen requires your opinion on garden lighting aesthetics," which was so transparent that even the guards stopped pretending it was anything other than Sira wanting company. Jack's presence in the palace was causing exactly the political chaos Sira had predicted. The court was divided between those who found the Queen's interest in a human engineer charming, and those who considered it a dangerous break with protocol. Diplomatic channels were lighting up with speculation about what this meant for Thessaran human relations. And Jack kept having awkward encounters with nobles who clearly wanted to know what his agenda was and couldn't comprehend that he didn't have one. "You're causing quite the disruption," announced a voice behind him as Jack worked on recalibrating atmospheric processors in one of the secondary gardens. He turned to find a Thessaran woman in formal diplomatic robes, her ears decorated with silver chains that marked her as high-ranking. "I am Velana Searmoth, Chief Diplomatic Advisor to the Queen." Jack Harrigan, guy who fixes things. He didn't stand mostly because he was currently shoulder-deep in a control panel. If you're here to tell me I'm causing problems, you're about the fifth person today. I'm here to understand what you want from the Queen. Nothing. She keeps inviting me to things. I'm just trying not to be rude by refusing. Jack pulled a burnt-out processing unit, examining it with professional interest. Your atmospheric systems are over-engineered, by the way. Beautiful but fragile. One component fails and the whole thing cascades. We value elegant complexity. I value systems that work when things go wrong. He installed a replacement unit, simplified the control pathways, and closed the panel. There, more robust, less likely to fail catastrophically. You're welcome. Velana's ears tilted in what he'd learned was disapproval. You approach everything with such directness. It's efficient. It's concerning. The Queen has shown more personal interest in you than anyone in years. The court is speculating about your intentions. Jack finally stood, wiping his hands clean. My intention is to fix your systems and not embarrass my company. Everything else is the Queen's choice. She's the one inviting me places, not the other way around. Why do you think she does that? Because I treat her like a person instead of a political entity, Jack suggested. Look, I don't know the intricacies of Thessaran court politics. I'm just an engineer who said something honest, and apparently that was unusual enough to be interesting. If you're worried I'm going to manipulate her or something, I literally don't know how to do that. Velana studied him with the kind of analytical focus that reminded him of Sira, though with more suspicion and less warmth. You're either remarkably genuine or remarkably good at deception. I'm really bad at deception, requires too much memory management. He gathered his tools. If you want to know what's happening between me and the Queen, maybe ask her instead of interrogating her maintenance contractor. I have asked her. She told me, and I quote, Velana, sometimes talking to someone who doesn't calculate every word is refreshing. Try it sometime. Jack couldn't help smiling. That sounds like her. It sounds like someone who's forgetting the responsibilities of her position. But Velana's voice carried concern rather than anger. The Queen has been alone for a long time, Engineer Harrigan. She has sacrificed personal connection for political necessity. If you're offering her something genuine, I'm glad. But if you're not, you'll break something that's already fragile. The warning was delivered with enough sincerity that Jack took it seriously. I'm not trying to break anything, I'm just being myself. If that causes problems, tell her to stop inviting me to things. She won't. And therein lies the problem. Velana moved toward the exit, then paused. There's a formal reception tonight. Diplomatic corps, nobility, the whole spectacle. The Queen will attend as required. You're not invited. It would cause too much speculation. But she'll be surrounded by people calculating every interaction, measuring every word. Remember that when you see her next. She left, and Jack stood in the garden thinking about what it meant to be isolated by authority, surrounded by people but profoundly alone. That evening, he didn't expect to see Sira. The reception was exactly the kind of formal obligation she'd complained about. All ceremony and calculation. Everything she'd said made her feel more like a symbol than a person. So he was surprised when, well past midnight, his quarters door chimed with the gentle tone that meant someone important was requesting entry. Sira stood in the corridor, still in her formal reception attire, elaborate robes that probably weighed more than his tool kit, her ears decorated with jeweled chains that caught the light. She looked exhausted and beautiful, and like she was barely holding together a facade that had finally become too heavy. "Can I come in?" Her voice was quiet, stripped of royal authority. Of course. Jack stepped aside, and she entered with the kind of relief that suggested she'd been performing for hours and desperately needed to stop. She moved to his window, looking out at the palace grounds, and slowly began removing the formal ear jewelry with practiced motions that spoke of years doing this alone. The reception was exactly as tedious as expected. 4 hours of diplomatic pleasantries, political maneuvering, and carefully calculated conversations where every word was measured for advantage. Sounds awful. It was profoundly lonely. She set the jewelry aside, and without it she looked younger, more vulnerable. I stood in a room full of people, and not one of them saw me. They saw the queen, the political entity, the symbol to be influenced or impressed. Jack didn't know what to say, so he did what he did best, spoke honestly. That's why you keep coming here, to talk to someone who sees you instead of the crown. Yes. She turned to face him, and her expression held something raw. You make me feel like a person, Jack, not a monarch, not a symbol, just someone worth talking to for who I am rather than what I represent. You are worth talking to. You're sharp, funny when you let yourself be, and you think about problems in ways that challenge my assumptions. The queen part is impressive, but it's not what makes you interesting. Sierra closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them they were suspiciously bright. Do you understand what you're doing to me? I have spent 23 years maintaining perfect control, keeping distance between myself and all others, sacrificing personal connection for political necessity. And you walk into my meditation chamber, call me stunning, and treat me like I'm simply a woman worthy of honest admiration. You are. I know. Her voice cracked slightly. And that's terrifying. Because I cannot afford to be simply a woman. I am a queen with responsibilities to billions. I cannot form attachments based on personal desire. I cannot prioritize my own feelings over political necessity. And yet I keep finding reasons to see you because you make me feel things I haven't felt in years. Jack moved closer, careful and deliberate. What do you feel? Seen, valued for something other than my position. Connected to someone in ways that have nothing to do with political advantage. She met his eyes, and hers held vulnerability that must have cost her to show. I feel like a person again, Jack. And I both desperately need that and cannot afford it. Why can't you afford it? Because attachments create vulnerabilities, weaknesses that rivals can exploit. The queen must be untouchable, unmoved by personal feeling. Her voice was quieter now. But I'm tired of being untouchable. I'm tired of perfect control. I'm tired of being alone in rooms full of people. They stood close enough that Jack could see the faint bioluminescence in her skin, the way her ears trembled slightly with emotion. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and touched her hand with the same careful honesty that had started this whole situation. Then don't be alone right now, he said simply. I'm just an engineer who's really bad at protocol, but I can be someone who sees you, for however long you need that. Sierra's fingers closed around his, and she made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it should be, at least for tonight. Jack squeezed her hand gently. Let the court panic about political implications tomorrow. Right now you're just someone who had a terrible evening and needs to talk to a friend. A friend, she repeated, testing the word. I haven't had one of those in a very long time. Then let's start there. They sat by the window, hands still loosely connected, and talked until Thessara Prime's sun began to rise. Not about politics or diplomacy or the complications of her position. Just two people sharing thoughts about everything and nothing. The kind of conversation that had no agenda beyond genuine connection. As dawn light painted the sky in impossible colors, Sierra finally stood to leave. She looked less exhausted now, more settled, as if something heavy had been shared and lightened by the sharing. Thank you, she said at the door, for seeing me, for not calculating what that means, for just being honest. It's kind of my default setting. I know, that's what makes it revolutionary. She smiled, and it reached her eyes in ways her formal expressions never did. My court will be scandalized that I spent the night in your quarters, even though nothing inappropriate occurred. Let them be scandalized. You needed a friend and I was available. That's not complicated. Everything about this is complicated, Jack, but her voice held warmth. And yet with you it feels simple. I'm not certain whether that's wonderful or dangerous. Why not both? She laughed, touched his hand once more, and left with the kind of exit that suggested she was already putting her queen persona back in place for the day ahead. Jack stood at his window, watching the palace wake up, and thought about how strange it was that honesty, just seeing someone as a person, could be revolutionary in a place where everything else was calculated for advantage. His scanner beeped with a maintenance request, pulling him back to the practical reality of his job. But he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted in the night, that a connection had formed that was going to change things in ways neither of them could predict. Outside, the floating gardens drifted through morning light, beautiful and impossible. Inside, Jack Harrigan began to understand that maybe fixing broken systems was easier than navigating what happened when two lonely people accidentally found each other in a palace full of political calculation. But he'd committed to honesty, so he'd figure it out as he went, like everything else in his life. The next 2 weeks established that Jack's presence in the palace had moved from curious diplomatic anomaly to full-blown political situation that no one knew how to categorize. The Queen's interest in the human engineer was no longer deniable or dismissible as temporary fascination. They were seen talking in gardens, consulting on infrastructure projects, having meals that were framed as technical discussions, but clearly weren't. The court was divided into factions: traditionalists who found it scandalous, progressives who found it romantic, and pragmatists who were trying to calculate what it meant for Thessaran human relations. Jack ignored all of them and focused on his actual job, which had expanded to include legitimately important infrastructure upgrades that the palace had apparently been neglecting for years. Your environmental systems were designed by someone who valued aesthetics over functionality, Jack told Sira during one of their evening conversations, which had become routine enough that guards no longer looked surprised when the Queen summoned her engineer. They're beautiful, but they're vulnerable to cascade failures. Much like monarchy, Sira observed, reading reports on a holographic display while Jack worked on a nearby control panel. Beautiful system, vulnerable to unexpected disruptions, such as human engineers who call queens stunning. Still not apologizing for that. I would be disappointed if you did. She dismissed her reports, giving him full attention. Velana informed me she interrogated you about your intentions. What did you tell her? That I don't have intentions beyond fixing things and not being rude when you invite me places. Jack closed the panel, satisfied with his modifications. She seemed concerned I might be manipulating you. Are you? I literally don't know how. Manipulation requires planning and deception. I'm bad at both. He moved to where she was sitting, comfortable enough now to occupy shared space without anxiety. I'm just a guy who said something honest, and apparently that was revolutionary enough to be interesting. Everything else has been you choosing to spend time with me. I have been choosing that, Sira admitted. More than is probably wise. The court notices everything, assigns meaning to every interaction. My time with you is being analyzed and interpreted in ways that range from scandalous to strategic. What's the actual reason? She was quiet for a moment, her ears tilting in that way that meant she was thinking carefully about her words. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I was before the crown consumed everything. You make me feel like Sira instead of Queen Seraphina. That's addictive in ways I didn't anticipate. Is that bad? It's dangerous for both of us. She stood, moving to the window with the kind of restless energy that suggested she was wrestling with something significant. There are people in my court who view any personal attachment I form as weakness to be exploited. Rivals who would use connection against me. If they believe you matter to me, they will target you to reach me. Jack processed this, his practical mind identifying the problem structure. So you're saying being friends with you comes with political risks. I'm saying being friends with me could get you hurt, or used as leverage, or caught in power struggles you don't understand. Her voice was tight with something that might have been fear. And I find myself caring about that in ways that complicate my ability to rule effectively. You're trying to push me away from my own safety. I'm trying to be honest about the reality of my position." She turned to face him, and her expression held conflict. "You walked into my life by accident, Jack. You weren't supposed to become someone I looked forward to seeing. Someone whose opinion I value. Someone who makes me laugh and feel human and remember what it's like to have genuine connection. But I did become that. Yes. And now I have to decide whether to protect you by creating distance or to be selfish and keep you close despite the risks." Jack stood, moving to where she stood by the window. The palace lights reflected off the floating gardens below, creating patterns of impossible beauty. "Can I offer an engineer's perspective on this problem? Please." "You're trying to optimize for every variable: political necessity, personal desire, my safety, your responsibilities. But some systems are too complex for perfect optimization. Sometimes you have to choose which variables matter most and accept that others will be suboptimal. And which variables should matter most? The ones that make you feel human instead of like a symbol." Jack spoke carefully, honestly. "Look, I'm not naive. I understand there are political risks, but you've spent 23 years sacrificing personal connection for perfect control, and it's made you lonely and isolated. Maybe the optimal solution isn't maximum security. Maybe it's accepting some risk in exchange for actually having a life." Sierra's ears tilted forward, and something in her expression shifted. "You're suggesting I be selfish." "I'm suggesting you be a person. Queens are people too, even if everyone treats you like you're not." That is remarkably subversive advice. It's honest advice, which is what you said you valued about me. Jack met her eyes directly. "I'm not asking for anything, Sierra. I'm not trying to complicate your life or put you in impossible positions. But if you're asking whether I'm willing to accept the risks of being your friend, yeah, I am. Because you're worth it." The silence stretched between them, loaded with implications and unspoken complexities. Then Sierra moved closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm with the kind of deliberate contact that had become their shared language of genuine connection. "You make everything sound so straightforward," she said quietly, "as if political reality can be solved like a malfunctioning generator. Some things are straightforward. Like the fact that you deserve to have someone who sees you as a person. The complications are real, but that doesn't make the straightforward things less true. The court will interpret this, assign meaning. Some will view you as my weakness. Let them. I'm just an engineer, not particularly important or influential. Targeting me wouldn't actually gain them much leverage. You're underestimating how much you've come to matter." Her voice was almost a whisper. "To me." Jack's heart did something complicated that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with the way she was looking at him, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Then we figure it out as we go," he said. "You're smart. I'm pragmatic. Between us, we can probably navigate whatever political chaos this causes." That is possibly the most optimistic assessment of a complicated situation I've ever heard. Optimism is underrated. Sierra laughed, the sound genuine and warm, and some of the tension in her posture released. "Stay," she said suddenly, "not just as a contractor, as part of the household officially. It would give you status that provides some protection, access that makes our time together less scandalous, and honestly, I would like to know you're not leaving when your contract ends." "That sounds like you're asking me to live here, in the palace. Permanently. I'm asking you to stay in my life." Her hand was still on his arm, and her eyes held something that made his carefully maintained professional distance feel increasingly inadequate. "Because I have spent weeks telling myself this is temporary, that you'll return to your ship and I'll return to perfect isolation. But I don't want that anymore. I want to keep having someone who treats me like Sierra instead of the Queen." "What would my official position be?" "Royal engineer who called the Queen stunning. Chief technical consultant to the royal household. Significant enough to justify your presence, practical enough to be believable." Her smile was tentative. "And accurate, You've improved more systems in 2 weeks than my regular staff has in years. Jack thought about his cabin on the Celestial Dawn, about the routine of moving between ships and stations, fixing problems and moving on. Thought about what it would mean to stay in one place, especially a place as politically complex as a royal palace. Then he thought about Sierra's laugh, the way her ears tilted when she was genuinely interested in something he said, the conversations that stretched into early morning because neither of them wanted them to end. "Okay," he said, "I'll stay." Her expression transformed, relief and joy, and something deeper that she quickly tried to control but not before he saw it. "Okay, I fix things. You need fixing. Not you personally, you're not broken, but your life has systemic issues that cause you to be lonely and isolated. I can't fix all of it, but I can be someone who sees you as a person. That seems like worthwhile work. You're comparing my emotional well-being to a malfunctioning system. I'm an engineer. It's how I understand problems." Jack smiled. "Besides, someone needs to upgrade all these over-engineered environmental controls before they cause a catastrophic failure." "Such romance," Sierra said, but her voice held warmth and her hand tightened slightly on his arm. "Very well, Jack Harrigan. Welcome to permanent residence in the Grand Palace of Thessara. Try not to cause more diplomatic incidents than absolutely necessary. No promises. Honesty tends to cause incidents." "I know. That's what makes you valuable." The official announcement went out the next day. Chief Technical Consultant Jack Harrigan would be joining the royal household staff on a permanent basis, providing expertise on infrastructure optimization and human Thessaran technological integration. The court buzzed with speculation. Diplomatic channels lit up with analysis. And Jack moved his 2 bags of belongings from temporary quarters to permanent residence in what was apparently a prestigious section of the palace, reserved for high-ranking household members. His supervisor sent a final message that Jack suspected would become legendary in contractor circles. "You went to fix a generator and ended up living in an alien palace with royal patronage. That's either the best or worst career move in company history. Keep us posted." The weeks that followed established new patterns. Jack worked on legitimate infrastructure projects, improving systems that had been neglected or over-engineered into fragility. Sierra attended her royal obligations, but made time for conversations that were no longer framed as technical consultations. They were simply 2 people who enjoyed each other's company, spending time together. The court gradually adjusted to his presence. Some nobles remained scandalized. Others began treating him with cautious respect, and a few progressives started citing the Queen's friendship with a human engineer as evidence that Thessara needed to modernize its approach to cross-species relations. Jack attended his first formal reception as a member of the royal household, and discovered that his default honesty made him surprisingly popular with certain factions who were tired of calculated diplomatic speech. When a noble asked his opinion on trade negotiations, he said, "I fix generators, not trade policy, but from an engineering perspective, your proposal seems to optimize for short-term advantage at the cost of long-term stability." The noble had looked shocked, then thoughtful, then actually revised his proposal. "You're becoming influential despite having no interest in influence," Sierra observed after the reception, both of them back in her private garden where they'd taken to ending most evenings. "I just answer questions honestly. Not my fault people aren't used to that. It's revolutionary in court circles." She was closer than formal propriety would suggest, comfortable in shared space in ways that would have been unthinkable when they first met. "You're changing the culture simply by being yourself." Accidentally changing cultures. Should I add that to my resume? You should. Right below called the Queen stunning and lived. Her hand found his. The contact casual now, comfortable. A shared language of connection that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with genuine care. Jack looked at her. This alien queen who ruled star systems, who'd been lonely in rooms full of people, who'd chosen to let him into her life despite political risks and cultural complications. Looked at how she smiled more now, how her ears tilted forward with genuine interest instead of careful political assessment, how she'd started laughing at his terrible engineering jokes. "I think I understand something," he said quietly. "What's that? Why you kept inviting me back, after that first conversation in your meditation chamber?" Jack turned to face her fully. "It wasn't just about me being honest. It was about me seeing you as a person worth that honesty, like you mattered enough to deserve genuine responses instead of calculated ones." Sierra's expression softened into something vulnerable. "Yes, that exactly. You treated me like I was worth genuine interaction, not just political maneuvering. Do you know how rare that is? I'm starting to understand." He squeezed her hand gently. "For what it's worth, you are worth it. The genuine interaction, the honest responses, all of it. Not because you're a queen. Because you're someone who thinks about things deeply, challenges my assumptions, and makes me want to be better at recognizing when systems include people's feelings. You're getting better at that, by the way. The people feelings recognition. I have a good teacher." Jack smiled. "One who called being friends with me addictive and dangerous but keeps choosing to do it anyway. Some risks are worth taking." Her other hand reached up to touch his face. A gesture that would have been unthinkable in formal settings, but here, in the privacy of her garden, was simply Sierra being human, or as human as an alien queen could be. "You walked into my life by accident, Jack Harrigan. Fixed my generator, called me stunning, and somehow became someone I can't imagine not having around. That's either fate or the universe having a peculiar sense of humor. Why not both?" She laughed, and Jack thought about how that sound, genuine, unguarded, free, had become his favorite indicator that his presence here mattered. "Thank you," Sierra said quietly. "For staying, for being honest, for treating me like a person when everyone else treats me like a symbol, for making me remember that I can be both a queen and someone who laughs at terrible engineering jokes. Those jokes are works of art. They're terrible, and you know it." But she was smiling, and her hand was still on his face, and the space between them had shrunk to almost nothing. Jack, whose engineering degree had not included courses on navigating intimate moments with alien royalty, decided to apply his fundamental principle: honest simplicity. "I should probably mention that I'm developing feelings that are more complicated than friendship," he said, because subtlety had never been his strength. "And I want to be honest about that before it becomes an issue." Sierra's ears tilted forward sharply, and her expression cycled through surprise, something that might have been joy, and careful consideration. "You're telling me you have romantic feelings for me?" "Yeah. Seems dishonest not to mention it, given that we're spending increasing amounts of time together, and I'm apparently living here permanently now. You're remarkably direct about emotional complexity. It's an engineering approach. Identify the actual problem instead of dancing around it." Jack met her eyes. "But I also recognize that you're a queen with responsibilities, and I'm just a contractor turned consultant, and there are probably 17 political reasons why this is complicated. So I'm not asking for anything, just being honest." "Just being honest," Sierra repeated, and her voice held something warm. "Do you know what I feel when you're honest like this? Terrified that I'm creating diplomatic incidents. Seen, valued, like my feelings matter enough to deserve honest acknowledgement instead of political calculation." Her hand moved to his, holding it firmly. "I have been developing complicated feelings too, Jack. Feelings that are inappropriate for a queen, inadvisable given our positions, and absolutely undeniable given how much I look forward to seeing you every day. So we both have complicated feelings." "Apparently." She smiled, and it was tentative but genuine. "The question is what we do about them." "What do you want to do about them?" "I want to be selfish," Sierra admitted. "I want to keep you close, keep having these conversations, keep experiencing what it's like to be seen as a person instead of a political entity. I want." She paused, vulnerability clear in her expression. I want to see where this goes, even though it's complicated and politically inadvisable and probably going to cause scandals. Jack processed this with the same directness he applied to engineering problems. Okay, then we do that. We see where it goes. We deal with complications as they arise. And we're honest with each other about what we're feeling instead of pretending feelings away for political convenience. You make it sound simple again. Some things are simple. Like the fact that I care about you and you care about me, and we both want to see what that means. The complications are real, but that doesn't make the simple parts less true. Sierra moved closer, closing the last distance between them, and rested her forehead against his in a gesture he'd learned was significant in Thessaran culture. Intimate trust, shared vulnerability. You're either the bravest human I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both, but I'm yours if you want me. I want you, she whispered. Advisor Villana is going to have a diplomatic crisis. The traditionalists will be scandalized. The court will speculate endlessly, and I find I don't care nearly as much as I should. Good, because I'm really bad at being anything other than exactly who I am. Which is apparently an engineer who calls Queen stunning and means it. She laughed against him, the sound muffled but joyful. Stay exactly who you are. That's what makes this work. They stood together in the garden as Thessara Prime's stars emerged in the darkening sky. Two people from different worlds who'd found connection through accident and honesty, and the revolutionary concept that maybe queens deserve to be seen as human too. Outside the garden, the court would speculate and calculate, and assign political meaning to every interaction. Diplomatic channels would buzz with analysis of what the queen's relationship with a human engineer meant for interstellar relations. And traditionalists would clutch their perfectly organized protocol manuals and despair about the erosion of proper royal distance. But in the garden, under impossible stars, Sierra and Jack simply held each other, honest, genuine, complicated, and completely unwilling to apologize for choosing connection over perfect political optimization. Because sometimes the best solution to a complex problem was the simplest one. Be honest, be genuine, and see where it leads. Even if it led to an engineer living in a palace, dating an alien queen, and accidentally revolutionizing court culture by treating everyone like they were simply people worth honest interaction. Jack's scanner beeped with a maintenance alert. Some system somewhere needed attention. He ignored it for once, focused on the person in his arms who'd chosen him despite political complications and cultural differences, and the scandalous nature of a queen caring about someone without calculated advantage. I should probably fix whatever that alert is about, he said eventually. Later, Sierra murmured. Right now, I want to be selfish and keep you here. Okay, but if the palace loses environmental control, I'm blaming you. I'm a queen. I can handle that responsibility. They laughed together, comfortable and genuine, and somewhere in the universe, fate, or chance, or whatever force, had led a maintenance engineer into a queen's meditation chamber, smiled at the chaos that honesty could create in a world built on political calculation. And Jack Harrigan, who'd come to Thessara Prime to fix a generator and accidentally found something infinitely more complicated and worthwhile, decided that sometimes the best engineering solution